Ready Player One, Assassin's Creed Origins, The Darkside Detective, and Dave Ryan from Link to the Cast. This is Staying In.
You and I, we actually talked about chilling out and doing whatever you want. I started thinking about it again the other day, about chilling out, doing whatever you want. And then I started looking at Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, the soundtrack, which is the classic.
This is a very, very Willington-esque segue we're making here. Talk about chilling out and doing nothing. I was listening to Tony Hawk's soundtrack.
It gets darker. I was listening to that, and then I was like,
hang on, it's not dark at the moment.
Oh, okay. Well, it's about to get very dark. And then I was like, oh wow, all of these extreme sports games that I remember from my childhood, they were so amazing. The soundtracks, like Thrasher and Tony Hawk's, and even Sean Murray's Wakeboarding had some good stuff. And I was like, oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to listen to the Dave Mirra soundtrack. And I was like, oh, that would be really, really exciting. Because I had no idea about Dave Mirra. The only way, and I looked into all of this because I was like looking through YouTube comments, and people had exactly the same reaction. People had said in these YouTube comments, I just came here wanting to listen to the Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX Remix soundtrack, and I found out he's dead.
Peter was worried about this getting dark.
I know.
Good Lord.
So we've just glossed over deaths of famous people, which is fine. A lot of other people that are dead. I'm just going to do segues today.
Is this just going to be an obituary episode? We just talk about, just round off people who are dead.
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about. That's the thing. I'm going to talk about. It's sort of inspired by the fact that I've been playing Assassin's Creed Origins, basically, because I've been wandering around this big Egyptian landscape, and like Assassin's Creed 2. There's bits in Origins where you're reminded of how bloody ancient absolutely everything is. So, in Assassin's Creed Origins, you're wandering around Egypt and you're doing assassinating, and if you play an Assassin's Creed game, which, Dan, I know I've tried to convince you to play every single one of them.
Hang on, Pete, can I ask the question that I always ask every time you play a new Assassin's Creed game?
Yeah.
Does this Assassin's Creed game solve the problems of all the other Assassin's Creed games? Because every time you talk to me about a game, I say, well, I played that, but I didn't like this part. And you say, play the next one. They completely solve that problem. So I play it, and then there's another problem.
What did you not like about the last Assassin's Creed game that you played? Like most of it?
I don't remember that. I think the last one I tried to play was Black Flag.
I think in 2016 they solved the problem of Assassin's Creed games because they didn't release one.
Yep. Well, okay. This is going to be an uphill struggle, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, it's Assassin's Creed again, and that's okay for me. They do change up the formula a bit. Like, if I was like the sort of person who would sit around and write up reviews and such, I would say that essentially what it does is it essentially takes the idea of the original Assassin's Creed and then executes upon that idea in the way that the original developer probably intended, in so much as it's a big open world and you can approach any assassination problem in however you want to approach it, in much the same way as the more recent Hitman games have done that, but not in quite as an elegant a way. It isn't a puzzle, really, in the same way that the Hitman games are. And Origins is very good. I think the combat's a bit naff. I think they've kind of changed it up for the worse.
See, my experiences with Assassin's Creed have always just revolved around kind of hunting down the person I'm trying to assassinate by leaping over being all cool and leaping over rooftops and kind of just getting to the edge and kind of peeking over the roof and seeing where he is walking down the street, then falling off said roof into his guards, and then spending the next 3 hours running away from guards.
I think that's
my whole experience. And then die, and then kind of rinse and repeat.
And I think that is a classic experience. I think and it is going to be in this as well. Just simply, it's going to be more of it because it's kind of open worldy, and therefore you can't control everything. Like in later Assassin's Creed games, even like Black Flag and Freedom Cry and Rogue and stuff like that, things got a little bit more scripted, and you could kind of figure out what the designer wanted you to do. In this one, because it's open world, there's more stuff always just happening and always going on. But what it has reminded me of is, because I've been thinking about it in terms of the landscape that you run around in. And you run around in a space where the Sphinx has has been painted for about 100 years. It's been constructed and painted for about 100 years or something along those lines. It's a relatively modern structure in this space. And it looks really incredible. Like, seeing it in today's eyes, obviously it's completely different. It's battered by the sand and the paint's all gone and all that sort of stuff. But seeing it as it would have looked, or what we think it would have looked like, is really genuinely amazing. And it reminds me of, like, holy cow, like, this is thousands of years ago. But the other really cool thing about it is that they keep talking about races that came before, like an Egypt before, which is not to do with the weird, like, Assassin's Creed ancients sort of precursor race stuff. It's nothing to do with that. It's literally about an Egypt with a completely different, with, you know, a different hieroglyphic set that actually existed a couple of, you know, 1,000 or so years before when this thing's actually set. And it just reminds me of, like, how old and ancient and crusty everything is, and how wonderful it is to basically, like, wander around it. But you guys are like, eh.
Do you find yourself when you're playing these, and I don't mean this in any kind of jokey way, do you find yourself almost at times treating it like an educational piece in terms of, especially with something like Origins, learning more about that kind of civilization, what's going on? As I say, I've not played it, so I don't know how it treats the historical nature of it. Do you find yourself learning things, or is it more kind of, is that more surface level?
I do. It's cool with Origins in so much as they now have you can just wander around no combat mode. Like, you can just wander around and use it as a virtual museum, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
So you can, like, wander into a tomb, and then it'll go, and then somebody will say, "Oh, this is where people were buried, and this is how the mummification process works."
Really in-depth commentary to go along with it.
It is meant to be apparently really, really good. Have you played it, Dave?
So I have the game, and I just kind of wanted to come in on that point of, like, the educational tour, because kind of to put on my other hat for a minute, I am a history teacher. So now
okay.
I haven't trudged the PS4 into the school at any stage when I've been teaching to show people this, but Assassin's Creed is like this surprisingly good touchstone for teenagers, for like even the terrible ones. So like a lot of people, when I introduced the French Revolution as a topic to them, knew more about the French Revolution than I was expecting, because of, was it Unity was the French Revolution
Unity
one
was
with
the
nightmare faces in it?
Yeah.
So having that kind of like that passive mode where you can walk around, and instead of just showing students like boring slides, you can just actually walk around in a living, breathing Egyptian setting is great. And the Assassin's Creed games I've dipped into in the past, I wouldn't call myself a fan of the series, but I'll get an occasional one, and it is the setting that sells it on me rather than kind of what's going on in it, because it's not a game that I will like play in a really long session. I'll kind of dip in and out of it because I like exploring the world rather than I'm sold on the story or the side quests or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like it for the virtual tourism. Absolutely. And I think it does excite you about the spaces. So, for example, my partner and I, we actually went to Rome because we like Assassin's Creed. Like, we went there because we wanted to wander around some of the spaces and look at the architecture and stuff like that. She probably went for a highbrow reason. I basically was like, I could climb up that. But with the thing that... It's interesting that you say that it's authentic, because I really hope, to some degree authentic, because I'm really glad to hear that. Because there were times in the series where it does tread this really fine line between providing an environment that feels right, feels authentic, feels like people are sort of going around the business that they might have had, and having a painted sphinx, for example.
Yeah.
Basically. Which I think is fascinating, but then the other problem with that is then you get a game like Syndicate, and with Syndicate, like, you can wander around London and you feel like, oh, this is great, but because this is our history, like as people from from Britain, like, this is a sort of shared history that we have, and it dips a little bit into French culture as well in Syndicate. We sort of know all of the cultural touchstones, right? Like so Dave, you're from Ireland originally, right?
Yes, yes.
And like, I'm assuming you get taught the same sort of vaguely similar like British history of like the Brits were great, then we went and killed a load of people, and it was fine.
I would say there's a bit more than just Brits are great, we killed some people, and that's it. There's probably quite a significant chunk where Brits were not so great.
There was the way history is taught in British schools was once described to me by a teacher over there as being kind of Britain were great explorers of the world. We went to all these other countries. Some stuff happened. We don't have to dwell on that. And then we gave them all their land back. Whereas here is kind of more getting into the detail on it. Irish history holds a grudge with British history quite considerably.
Yeah, and I think fairly. But basically, I guess the point I'm making is that we share, like, we know who Darwin is, right? We know who people like Arthur Conan Doyle are, those sorts of people. We know who these people are. In the same way, I'm assuming that when people played Assassin's Creed 2, in fact the entire Ezio trilogy, if you were Italian, I'm sure that you would know more of who the Borgias are. Like, I only found out about who the Borgias are because of those games. Now the problem is when they did Syndicate, I was like, oh cool, it's going to be stuff I know already. How are they going to cleverly weave all of these characters together? Mm-hmm. And the answer is they don't cleverly weave them together at all. They just mash them. They just like for example, there's a bit, and obviously spoilers, there's a bit where you are doing like a raid on a poison chemical factory or something like that, and you've been asked to do it, and by this old man who you don't really know who it is. And he goes, run into there, go save the orphans. And you go in, you save the orphans, and you run out, and the building explodes because you've caused this huge build-up of energy, and it smashes everywhere, and you jump out. You do the eagle flying leap and all that sort of stuff. You fall into the hay, and a hand comes into the hay to pick you out. And he goes, Arthur Conan Doyle, great to meet you. And you're like, oh no, like, this is bad. And it's like, it's peppered with moments of like, even the intro says, we have no idea how high the Templar menace goes. And there's just a panning shot of Queen Victoria.
Yeah. One of the things, not to keep going back to teaching history or anything like that, but one of the things that we kind of try to teach kids as part of like developing critical thinking and things like that is that whenever a work of narrative fiction intersects with actual historical events, we need to be very aware of the way in which they're doing that. So you could have a more documentary style where actual events are going on and the narrative of this game isn't in any way intersecting with those. So like have a game where, you know, the Templar or whatever never come across these historical figures. They're just mentioned, or things are happening in the background of these events. Or you go full on the other side, which I would describe as like the Back to the Future kind of, where you're actually, you know, the Chuck, the scene with Chuck Berry.
Events.
Yeah, it's your cousin Marvin Berry, that kind of thing. So, like, that's kind of way the other side of the spectrum, and what you'll find is a lot of games like Assassin's Creed will be somewhere in the middle, because they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have a faithful representation of a historical setting or event, but they also just can't resist having the toys, having the potential to kind of have, like Queen Victoria or Arthur Conan Doyle or something like that. So what I would use these games more as is take in the architecture, take in the feel of the period. They capture that quite well in a lot of the Assassin's Creed games, about what it would have been like just to, as you say, walk around, have a look at these buildings at the time, about how people are interacting with each other. Don't necessarily take it as an interactive documentary.
And I think that is something that games do really well. I mean, for example, definitely like one of my favourite games of last year was Yakuza 0. And the Yakuza series itself is incredibly good at that kind of world building. Like, if you want to go and wander around Shinjuku, like, there is a game for that, and it's in the Yakuza series. I mean, I think we've talked about it a little bit previously, but you're just playing it at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, so I had picked it up at some point last year, and 2017 was just, I don't have to tell you, like 2017 was a year where there was something worthy of your attention coming out every few weeks. Yeah. So I think I got Yakuza 0 in it came out in like January, didn't it?
Yes, it did, yeah.
So I was playing it for a couple of weeks, and then Horizon Zero Dawn and Breath of the Wild dropped within a couple of weeks of each other, and that was me completely gone. So with Yakuza 6 coming out in the West in a few weeks, I kind of said, right, I need to pick up Yakuza 0, get through that, and like make some sort of progress on Kiwami as well before Yakuza 6 comes out. And I can definitely see how it kind of it almost rhymes with that idea of the virtual tourism in Assassin's Creed, that it doesn't capture actual events as much as it captures a feeling of walking around 1980s Japan. And I think part of that, I was talking on our podcast this week about this, is the idea that they didn't try to localize the dialogue. They didn't get in Western voice actors, and it keeps a really authentic feel.
I think it's also a game that's is actually quite brave in a lot of ways. Like, it isn't trying to plaster over what the districts that it presents actually are. Like, they are clearly nightclub and red light district hotspots, like, and they're meant to be, and they are a bit grubby, but they're not like Western grubby. Yeah. They're not that sort of like leering sort of Mac kind of, has like, that's not besmirchment on technology, that's besmirchment on horrible coats, like that sort of like gross, grimy kind of thing. It's just like this is where you go and you pick up prostitutes.
Yeah, it's very matter of fact, as opposed to being done for show.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not like there is a little bit of gratuity to it, but it isn't. It's handled in an okay way. It's handled there's a really good extra credits episode actually about how Yakuza 0 handles how it portrays sexuality in a lot of ways, and it sort of undercuts a lot of the sexual bawdy humour. So, for example, Dan, and you'd love this with an impressionable kid wandering around. Well, not wandering around. Can it wander around now?
No.
Can Toby do that?
No.
Can Toby not wander around?
No.
What can Toby do now? How many months how many months have you had him?
I've had him for 6 months.
Yeah. What can he do?
He can now kind of sit up.
Yeah.
And he can roll over.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty good. All right. Okay. Well, he can't wander around, but can he focus on things?
Yeah, he can focus on things.
Yeah, so he can see.
So what? I'm curious as to what you're trying to. Considering you came off the back of saying something like sexual bawdy humour, and you're trying to now talk about giving impressionable children information.
It's never too young to start a child on the Yakuza series, is what he's saying.
Yeah. No, what I'm saying is that, like, I'm sure that there's going to be a point with you, Dan. I'm sure, because I'm sure, I don't know, from a certain number of months, like, you can have whatever you want on the television and it'd be absolutely fine, right? You could have, like...
Oh, no. If his shows aren't on TV, he cries.
Oh, right, okay, that's fine.
He absolutely knows what shows are his and what shows are not.
I do too, in fairness.
But for example, if you wanted to, if you and the good lady wanted to watch, like, a more serious film, let's say, I don't know, one where there's like bad language, for example. You wouldn't like turn that off around the little one right now, because it's like, well,
not at this stage. No.
He's not going to remember. Okay, so point is, you probably wouldn't want to have Yakuza 0 running at the moment, because there are basically whole sequences that are about what's the nice way of saying this? There's a whole mainstream thread of the game where you have to basically go into a shop that's essentially built for relieving stress in the middle of the day,
so like massages and stuff
of a sort.
Yeah.
DIY massages, you might say.
DIY massages. That is what we're. You could refer to it as that if you wanted. In fact, that's how I will refer to it now from here on after. Basically, taking things into your own hands, basically. It's an entire main thread about this, and it could be played, and it is played a little bit for cheap laughs, right?
Yeah.
But there is, it always undercuts that humour with a sense of saying to the player, you know this is weird, right? Like, you know this is kind of pervy, what you're doing. For example, the first time you go and watch one of the video stimulants available, it provides you a trophy that is publicly available on your trophy feed on PlayStation. So it just goes, congratulations, you've done this thing. And it's like, and when it pops up, you think, oh, that's a really clever way of, and I think the trophy is called something like I did it for the trophy. Yeah. It's a really, really clever way of undercutting this really sort of bawdy humour and that kind of thing. But I guess you probably wouldn't want, minors wandering around.
There's an element between that and some other things in Yakuza 0 where the developers are the designers, they're aware that there's a kind of, like you say, voyeuristic body humor that will be associated with a game set in this place at this time, and all of it is done with a tone of like, look, we know what this is. We don't think this is fantastic. It's funny. It's creepy. It can be both of these things. And generally speaking, at least, if you wanted to not do that, you can. It's not stuff that you're forced to do throughout the game.
It's good. It's good. But I definitely wouldn't. I'd definitely mute it, Dan.
Okay.
I was trying to think. I was like, oh, what will I talk about? Because generally, like, I've been playing Yakuza 0. As kind of I was saying there, I also have FIFA as my general cleanser from things.
Nice.
And it's hard to kick the habit once you're down that rabbit hole.
Which football team do you play as?
I play as Manchester United.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, that or Barnet as well.
Okay, and is that are they good?
Okay, hang on.
That's a complicated question, Peter.
Pete, I know you don't know things like football.
Yes,
but you know that Manchester United are a good team.
No,
don't sit there and try and say that they're not.
In his defence, Dan, I support Manchester United, and I'm not sure they're a good team some weeks. But
I follow a couple of different people on Twitter, and every weekend I'm fucking have to I have to see a load of football chat. I'm glad you don't do it, Dan. I always thought they were really good because they had Cantona, they had Schmeichel, they had Roy Keane.
Go on.
They had Giggs.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for him to name someone who wasn't in like the 1993 team.
They had Gareth Southgate.
No. Swing and a miss, and that's that. Game over. Thanks for playing.
I got 4.
Here's what you could have won.
Yeah.
So
do they not play there anymore?
What?
Or?
Sorry,
they don't play there anymore, do they?
Play where? Sorry,
no.
They don't play anymore.
No. Thing is, footballers, weirdly, just like normal people, get older.
Yeah.
And so the bodies don't work quite as well as they used to.
Oh, so it's more of like
so they stop playing the incredibly athletic and fitness taxing sport of football.
Right. Okay. Well,
entropy really gets in the way a lot of the time.
Was it 2017 or 2016 Titanfall 2?
I think it was 2016.
Was it 2016?
It was 2016. Yeah. Yeah, it was 2016. So I'm also hot off the press on this one.
Bloody hell.
I've been playing, and I've not been playing a lot. I've only just recently started it. Titanfall 2.
Right. Why? Why have you gone to Titanfall 2? I can't.
There's a very.
What's
clear
your mental
reason.
process here?
Well, one, it was a gift, but a gift I asked for.
Okay, fine.
But it was a gift I asked for, and my reasoning was on my kind of list of shelves. What I've tended to kind of somehow amass, and I think it's probably a sign of a kind of a genre, a move in the kind of. Let me say this right again. And I think it's a sign maybe of kind of a move towards a certain genre in video games of sandbox games. There's a lot of games now which are sandbox and open world and quest driven and kind of find your own way through. And those are amazing games. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I find them quite exhausting. And sometimes I want a much more linear, kind of just structured, straightforward A to B game. So, for example, one of the best games I ever played, Uncharted 4.
Yep.
Which is fairly linear.
Yeah.
It might have some side stuff, but it's pretty much fairly linear. It's level after level after level. And that's what I kind of want at times. So I wanted something that was going to just not be open world. It wasn't going to take me 40 hours to feel like I'd actually done anything in the game. And I also, to put it bluntly, and I don't mean this in any way disrespectful to the game and people who love the game, I wanted kind of a dumb shooter. That's basically what I wanted.
Okay, right.
And when I looked at it, I'd heard some good things about Titanfall 2, because obviously Titanfall originally was just, the first Titanfall was just online multiplayer only. I'm not a big multiplayer fan. I'm just not very good at it. So when you put me in a competitive environment, I kind of just end up last, and it's no fun, really. I'm not the kind of person who's going to engage with random people around the world and call people bad words, and that's just not me. I'm just wants to just sit there and shoot some bad guys. So when I heard about Titanfall 2, it had a solo campaign. I'd heard some good things about the solo campaign. So I just kind of I put it on my list, and I got it for my birthday, so I was very happy, and I started playing it recently. And it's obviously made by Respawn, who used to obviously make the Call of Duty games, so they were kind of behind like the Modern Warfare games before they kind of split off from Activision. And I have to say, I'm enjoying it, even though I thought I'd enjoy it. I'm enjoying it far more than I thought I would, and I'm finding it's one of the first games I've played in a while. You know, you have that feeling when you play a game, and suddenly you realise that you feel like you've played it for like 20 minutes, but actually it's been like 2 hours that you've been playing it for, because you've just kept going and going and going. And suddenly you look at the clock and you think, God, it's 11:45, I need to go to bed. And you kind of like, maybe just one more go. I haven't had that feeling in such a long time, because I've been playing open world games or stuff, certain games like Uncharted 4 I've wanted to take my time with, so I've very rationed my time. Because this game kind of, it's very kind of it's very quick, it's very accessible, it's very fun, it's just kind of really easy to pick up and move with, and it's also really good. I mean, one thing I've always thought with the Call of Duty games, it was kind of what Infinity Ward were doing, what Respawn have done. They're very good at kind of the handling of first-person shooters. I always feel there's substance in the gameplay and the mechanics, the way they kind of construct the games and how they feel. It's a very similar feeling with Bungie with the Halo series. So I love the Halo series as well, and I got a very similar theme to that.
Do you mean mechanically how you move through the space?
It's when you're shooting the gun, it's the intricacies of kind of the kickback you're getting from the gun, the feeling of shooting that gun in the game. Because obviously you've got the actual physical response is like a vibration in the controller, but I can play two different shooters, and one feels just much more substantial than another. And I think that's what kind of you have it with Call of Duty, and you got it through, and you get it with Titanfall and Titanfall 2. Just that feeling of substance behind it. And I've been playing it, and I've not got that far. I'm kind of ploughing through it, and I'm just really enjoying it, to the point where I'm kind of like, I want to tell myself to slow down, because I'm just going to speed through this. It's going to be over in no time. I'm probably going to crank up the difficulty to make it a bit more harder for myself, so it takes me a bit of time. But I did think, Pete, I have to say, I did think of you when I was playing it.
Oh, yeah?
Because it reminded me of us in one aspect, but it very much reminded me of one of your favourite games of all time.
Okay. Hello Kitty Roller Rescue.
Yes! Absolutely. Yes, no. The game it reminded me of, for a very specific reason, is Mirror's Edge.
Yes.
There is a very much, even though what Mirror's Edge did really well was that feeling of fluid movement, of one thing onto another thing, onto another thing, onto another thing. And with Titanfall, if you're good enough, if you're kind of quick enough with it, you can get that same sense of fluid movement. And they have kind of wall running is a big part of it. Is the kind of one of the mechanics where you can get most of the movement around kind of large gaps in kind of rock face and stuff like that. You're kind of running along walls, and the kind of the sensation of doing so is very smooth, and it kind of feels very satisfying, and you can chain these different movements together, and you feel, just like with Mirror's Edge, you feel kind of cool doing it. I'll run up a wall, run kind of 20 foot down the wall, then leap off, and then kind of use my rockets to lift me higher, and then I'll land on someone and take them out, all in one fluid movement. And it feels really great when you manage that. And it is a difficult kind of, without that could very easily feel very lightweight. And I think something that Mirror's Edge did really well, and this manages as well. You have that heft, you have the weight of kind of what you're trying to do.
So, Dave, have you played Titanfall 2?
Yeah, so I think I've all but finished the campaign on Titanfall 2.
I was going to say, so in terms of spoilers and such, because there are some bits that are... There's things in Titanfall 2 that if you don't know about them going in, they are way more effective than when you actually approach them. So, Dan, where have you got up to in the story?
I have to say, I've not got too far. So I've got to the point for people who aren't familiar with Titanfall, the gameplay is built around both a regular first-person shooter kind of role, like a soldier type thing, but also the ability to kind of leap into your... what's known as a Titan, these kind of huge kind of mech robot suits who have kind of artificial intelligence. So I've not long. I'm past the point where I've got my Titan now, so I'm able to use him now.
Okay.
And so I've moved slightly beyond that story, and I have to say, having not played Titanfall 1, so not really having any experience of kind of working with a Titan. It doesn't take too long into the game before you get into a Titan for the first time. And I did have a sense of kind of occasion when that moment happened. When you get into that time for the first time, even though I had no kind of background behind it, I did feel like, okay, yes, let's do this. This feels good. I'm really looking forward to doing this. I'm excited by this.
Okay, so Dave, with the knowledge of where Dan is at, I think what did you make of Titanfall 2? I mean, obviously you're saying you're not quite finished it, but...
Okay, yeah. So I kind of, a lot of what Dan's saying sounds exactly like my early experiences with the game when I started the campaign. So one of the things I really enjoyed about it is that idea that while you're in the Titan, even though it feels like the Titan itself has heft to it, it has weight, it does feel like you're in this kind of large mechanical beast that's just destroying everything in front of it. But there's also, as you say, a fluidity to the movement that you're not kind of lumbering along. Like in a lot of games that do have sequences involving getting inside a mech suit, it feels like you're just dragging along. The movement is a real problem. But here you're just zipping around, as you say, like the wall run combos where you can run up a wall, shooting people as you're running up the wall, jumping off the wall. It feels really, really satisfying. The campaign, I didn't think, because when you think about a substantive campaign in a first-person shooter, you're never really... The bar isn't set that high for you nowadays. You know, you're not expecting it to be a primary focus, more of an afterthought to teach you how to play the multiplayer mode that they really want you to play.
Which is a shame, because there are a lot of kind of older first-person shooters. I remember all the Halo games. That campaign, although obviously the multiplayer eventually kind of took over as being one of the prime focuses, those campaigns in those first few games were fantastic, and you got a real sense of kind of history and kind of importance behind the story that was being told.
Yeah, I think it's kind of coming back now as well with the machine games. Wolfenstein games are very story focused. Like not even having a multiplayer mode in Wolfenstein 2, the New Colossus, shows you where their priorities are. They want to craft a story around a shooter. That campaign mode in Titanfall 2 is great, and as you were kind of alluding to there, Peter, like as the story goes on, there are some really interesting and wild directions it gets taken in, and some ways it subverts what you're expecting from big dumb mech shooter. But at its very base level, like, it's just a very fun game to play, and I think it's the closest I will get to a really good, substantial Pacific Rim game.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison, actually, yeah.
There was a game I picked up again recently that got a port to the Switch, so this is as good an excuse as any to talk about the Irish game scene, such as it is at the moment, because it's still kind of an emerging scene, independent games over here. I was trying to kind of trace back what the kind of the genesis of games over here in Ireland are, and I found out a couple of interesting things when I was looking at it. So about the earliest trace of any sort of big games company being over here in Ireland was Atari had a plant down in the south of Ireland from 1979 to 1998, where they manufactured arcade cabinets at a rate of about 2,000 a week.
Wow!
2,000 a month. Sorry.
Okay,
2,000 a month.
That's still good.
From 79 to 98, and then kind of after that, my favourite little fact about the burgeoning Irish scene was that in 1988 there was a company called Emerald Software based out in Waterford, which is on our southeast coast. And they made Michael Jackson's Moonwalker for the Commodore 64 and MSX.
Wow.
Okay, so it was the port of a all-right game.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. That sounds good.
But since then, we've had a lot of kind of, because we have a famously low corporate tax rate, there's a lot of companies like EA, Activision Blizzard, Zynga, Havoc, they've all brought kind of a lot of their customer service operations out here. So in terms of the presence of the big boys on the scene, that's all we've got. Then there's a big gap, and then we've got Irish independent developers. And one of the things that really helped kickstart the scene was that about 4 years ago, John Romero moved here to Ireland. He lives in Galway now, himself and his wife, Brenda. Oh. She is a lecturer down in the University of Limerick, and they kind of moved over to see what the story was in terms of, is there a scene here in Ireland, and what can we do to try and kickstart things? So there's a lot of independent studios have started cropping up over the last 10 years or so. I think the only games that I had heard of before that had come out of the scene before the game I'm going to talk about are the Little Acre and Guild of Dungeoneering, were both Irish games.
Oh, they're both pretty damn good, actually.
Yeah, so then we have this Darkside Detective, which is what I was here to talk about. And they're from a developer called Spooky Doorway out in Galway.
Okay.
And what it is, on the face of it, is a real throwback, a point-and-click adventure game that, in terms of its narrative, is kind of like, it's part buddy cop narrative and part sci-fi supernatural game. Where you play a detective, Francis McQueen, and he has his partner with him, Officer Dooley, and they're part of this Twin Lakes Police Department. You can see what that's a reference to.
Yeah.
And they're the Darkside Division, so if there's any case that's a little bit weird, a little bit creepy, a little bit spooky, these are the two guys you call. The game, the way it's set up is that there are six small cases that are the kind of, or chapters you might call them, of the game, that are all kind of, one of the things I really liked about it, I picked it up about 6 months ago maybe on Steam, and the thing that's great about it is that you can sit down, play through a case in less than an hour and be perfectly entertained, and then you can put it away, come back to another case later. There's no kind of thread going through all the cases that you absolutely need to stick around for really long sessions for. The thing that really kept me coming back to it, that I really love about it, is the humor of the game. I think it's some really, really sharp writing in it, and the humor kind of runs the gamut. There's a lot of kind of referential humor, so if you're kind of like Gen X or later than that, there's going to be a lot of kind of references, both kind of obvious and subtle, that you will probably enjoy in it. There's a lot of kind of fourth wall breaking humor, surreal humor, dry humor. I was trying to think of, like, for people like yourselves who have never heard of Darkside Detective, like, what's the best comparison? And in some ways, it's like if Garth Marenghi's Dark Place was a game, but also a buddy cop situation.
That is, like, I was just looking at it on Steam and I was like, this looks pretty cool, like pixel art and all that sort of stuff. Like, Garth Marenghi, that is the thing that's making me go, yeah, cool, okay, yes, I'm on board. Like, okay, yeah. So it is.
Pete's already like purchased. It's already in his card.
Just take my credit card. Yeah. Okay, that sounds really. So is it? So it's point and click adventure.
Yeah.
How does it handle the major problem with point and click adventures traditionally, which is as soon as you stop knowing how to move forward, it gets real tedious real fast. Like, I find Monkey Island, for example, like when I love everything about it, every single thing about it, except for the puzzles, because the puzzles are just way too hard for me. I get up to it, I get stuck because I'm dumb, and then I'm not enjoying it anymore.
Yeah, so like as you say, kind of the main type of puzzle mechanic is the classic point and click, find a MacGuffin X to put into slot Y, or figure out some way that two items will combine with each other. One thing I will say is that it's not the way in which those puzzles are solved, with a couple of exceptions. I was not really getting stuck on them, because if you are kind of thinking about it logically, it's not too much of a leap to figure out what needs to be done. And even when it is a little bit, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just going to kind of poke and prod and wander around the different rooms to figure out what it is, that writing comes back in again, and it stops you from getting angry at the game, because every time you poke something or interact with something, there's some sort of line, some sort of dialogue tree with another character or something that's going to go, okay, well, I'm kind of glad I went out of my way to get that. In the course of just going into a random room, I ran into the ghost of Terry Pratchett. And there are like a few ghosts of famous literary figures. Like there's the ghost of Edgar Allan Poe is up in a darkened room feeling really sorry for himself. To get back to the puzzles, there are some kind of puzzles that change that formula of trying to combine items and figure out what to do with them. There's usually one or two per episode that are a little bit different than that, so it's not 100% of the time that kind of Monkey Island or Grim Fandango, where you need to combine items that no one would ever realistically combine, and you kind of you feel like, how is someone supposed to know this unless they already know the answer? There's none of those cases in this. I don't think.
The analogy I really love, I heard it years ago, and the analogy I really like is good point and click adventures. You should naturally figure out what you should be combining with everything else. Bad point and click adventures, you have to basically criminally profile the designer to figure out what they thought figure out their thought process as to what's a good joke, or like how can these two or three different objects go together in such a weird way that nobody would kind of stumble across it. Yeah,
so there's I remember when Grim Fandango came out remastered for the PS4, and I decided I hadn't played it since I was a child, so I was going to play it again. And there's a puzzle early on in that game that involves balloon animals,
right? That
I could not remember how I solved it years and years ago, and I just was staring at the screen, getting more and more annoyed. And then it literally was, as you say, I just went, what would Tim Schafer have done here that would have made him laugh a lot just to annoy people? And that's how I figured it out.
Yeah. And it's not great in that way. So does it manage to avoid that?
I never had to look up a guide or anything like that, but I was just, there's that tipping point where you go from, this is challenging, but I think the answer's right in front of me, to, this is dumb and I don't want to play video games anymore. There's that tipping point, and it was right as I was about to veer into just out and out rage, I figured out what to do, and it was over. So for 99% of the puzzles going on in there are relatively straightforward. Like, the game isn't there to try and beat you. The game is there to be entertaining, and these puzzles are the mechanic they've decided to kind of use to bring you through. The style, though, is another thing that kept me coming back, as well as the writing. Like you were saying there, Peter, when you're looking up, like, the pixel art style is really cool looking. There's a nice soundtrack that in a lot of ways is very stereotypically, if you made this TV show in the mid 1980s, the soundtrack to this game is exactly the soundtrack you have in your head right now thinking about that. It's just this game. It came out last year by this small studio in Galway. A lot of people who have, if you look at the scores on Steam and things like that, a lot of people who played it really, really like it, and a couple of people who have recommended it to have liked it as well. It just doesn't seem to, for whatever reason, it's a small point-and-click adventure, and it's not really... Point-and-click adventures aren't the popular genre to be making games in anymore, really. But for whatever reason, it's just kind of gone under the radar for a lot of people.
I've started reading Ready Player One, which is a film coming out soon, and I actually got this as a gift from Chris Darby of this parish.
Who?
Chris Darby, your friend. that geek.
Don't like him. Don't like him.
So yeah, he bought me this book. I think it was last year he bought it for me. And I finally got around to starting it kind of a little while ago, knowing kind of that the film was coming out. And it's a book that, to give you the kind of a brief overview of what the idea of the book, it's the book revolves around a kind of a virtual reality kind of environment called the Oasis, and the Oasis is kind of taken over to the point of many people live their lives through the Oasis because the world around them has kind of failed, and it's almost dying, depending on kind of financial ruin and kind of all these different kind of poverty has spread through the world. So
it's a dystopia, but it's not a post-apocalyptic.
It's on the verge of a dystopia. I think it's absolutely kind of at that peak, tipping into dystopia. It's not quite there yet. And so the idea is that this environment, this kind of virtual reality world of Oasis, was created by this kind of figurehead, and he has kind of given it to the world in the similar to kind of Tim Berners-Lee with the internet. He kind of created the internet and then just let the world have it, as opposed to kind of charging people for it and all that. So just kind of created this thing which is incredibly important and just gave it to the world. And that's the idea with this, is that the Oasis has been given, and then if you have the device that enables you to log into it, it's yours. You can do whatever you want in there. And the plot of the kind of the story is that the creator has died, and in his will he has kind of laid out this kind of big long riddle and
scavenger hunt, really.
Yeah, kind of this opus of a will, kind of saying that if you can solve all these riddles and all these puzzles, at the end of it, there is the prize of my company, my multi-billion-dollar company. You will have it, but you have to solve these riddles, and they're incredibly complex, and no one can do it. But the kind of the plot device of this whole thing is that the creator, James Halliday, is obsessed with 80s culture. And so the game is littered with 80s culture. So when we talk about these references for the book, it's based on all these kind of touchstones in culture, but the book itself, in addition, adds more references, which I don't know if kind of, Dave, I'm not sure if you've kind of read any of the book. There's a lot of, I've struggled a little bit with it in terms of some of the enjoyment, because I feel as though some of the references are a case of the writer saying, hey, look what I know. Yeah. I know about this obscure movie because I've written it down. There's quite a few times where the kind of the lines will be, it's just like, this happened, which is just like this, as I saw in this film and this film and this film. And it's jarring at times. So, for example, some of the 80s references, and I know some of these, I haven't read them in the book yet, but I've seen them in the film trailer, so I know they're in there. Is stuff like the DeLorean car from Back to the Future. There is the Iron Giant. These are in the trailer. As far as I've got in the book, one of the first puzzles they have to solve is they go through the Tomb of Horrors, which is a very famous puzzle and kind of level, so to speak, from Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
So Tomb of Horrors, obviously, kind of written by Gary Gygax in there, and that's the main creator was supposed to be a fan of this, and I'm enjoying the book, and I really am enjoying the book, and it's nice having kind of a piece of media, where it's a book and obviously going to be a film, that doesn't treat gamers like the stereotype. Yeah. And one of the worst films I've ever seen in my entire whole life, which Sam seemed to enjoy, is the film Gamer.
Yeah, that is a top film. Love that film.
It's not a top film.
It's so good.
The plot of Gamer is people on death row are controlled by people in the real world in death matches.
Oh, okay? It's so bad.
And the two main gamers that you see in the game, one is like a child, a prepubescent child, who just likes to shoot people. The other is like a 30-year-old man who spends the entire game just sat on a chair in his pants, eating crisps. And those are kind of the two kind of extremes of what the stereotype of a gamer is.
Well, all three of us are in our pants, so like I'm pretty sure like that's it. Like
Yeah, people, we didn't want to be. You forced us to do that to record.
Yeah, said no recording.
You said you wouldn't come on if we weren't in our pants.
I can't record unless everyone's in their pants.
You told me the microphones didn't work.
You should yeah, well, I'm glad that you believe me about the cameras as well. So, so it's nice that we're treated like our thing is
and
important.
I don't want to say it's nice that we're treated fairly, because that implies that this is the first thing that's ever done that.
Yeah,
it's absolutely
yeah,
not.
no.
Yeah, gamers are absolutely mainstream and are treated absolutely fair. But it's nice to see. Maybe it's nice that it's like a big blockbuster film directed by Steven Spielberg, that it's given kind of an element of importance almost with this. And it is just, I mean, it's not going to go down as one of Steven Spielberg's greatest films. I know that, because it's just not. It's quite a throwaway popcorn type of story, and that's what it is. And don't get me wrong, Steven Spielberg, one of the best at making throwaway popcorn films, and I will watch this film, and I'm sure I will enjoy it. But I do like the fact that gaming isn't treated as a bad thing.
Yeah,
but
because I think sometimes in certain forms of media it can be.
But does the book essentially treat geek culture like? Is it essentially the equivalent of walking through a forbidden planet? Like,
no, because it's not treated as geek culture. It's treated as culture.
No, yeah. but that's what I mean. Like, is it treated in such a way that feels genuinely meaningful to the overarching story, and therefore the tone of what the book is trying to achieve, or is it done in such a way as to say, hey, remember the Jolly Green Giant commercials for Sweet Corn? That was good. I'm assuming that's in it, because like that.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it absolutely does that. It does the, hey, remember the Jolly Green Giant? I do, because I remember these things.
I like Sweet Corn.
But I think,
yeah,
don't get me wrong, it's absolutely a film and a book about video games. That's undoubtable. What I would say is that it's not in the context of the story and in the kind of the film. What will be is games. It's not about people playing games. It's just about games being a thing in life.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what everyone does. When you play it, you're not a gamer. You're just a person. Because of the nature of the Oasis environment, everyone is involved with it, and it's become a regular thing. So people will go to school in the Oasis as opposed to going to school down the road. So it's a way of allowing kind of education to be more accessible and all that stuff. But I like the fact that you're not treated as almost like I think in the past, films have treated the gaming community as an outsider element. People go into a room by themselves and play games, and then after leaving that, they return to the real world.
Yeah.
Now you have that because they're going into an environment, a virtual environment, but that's where everyone is. That is the real world. Yeah, more or less. As far as that's the impression I get anyway.
Yeah, the book and presumably the film as well treat gaming and video games with a level of just matter-of-fact ubiquity that, like, you don't consider someone with a television in their house to be like a television addict necessarily, much as you don't consider somebody with this Oasis headset in their house to be any different from anyone else, because everyone has one, everyone uses it. I read the book,
and everyone uses
well.
it for different methods or different reasons, but it's just a part of their life.
Yeah, I read the book a couple of years ago as well, and I totally get the kind of the common threads in the terms of the referential humor that I was talking about in Darkside Detective and in this. The one thing I would say about Ernie Klein's book is that I think maybe his editor could have hacked some of his references out, because the key difference for me, Peter, in between the book and the game I was talking about is if you take all the referential humor out of Darkside Detective, for example, you still have a plot that makes sense characters that can still interact because it's not the kind of the sole pillar on which the writing and the humor stands on. It's just one of the pillars it stands on. Whereas if you take all the 80s references out of Ready Player One, the book, it doesn't make complete sentences.
And that's the point that you make. I'm sat right on that fine line, kind of swaying towards the side that I'm enjoying and the side that's kind of jarring for me. It's here's 3 references of obscure films and TV shows and just 80s products that I know of that you don't know. And that's what I'm getting. I mean, I am enjoying it, absolutely. There's no reason I would stop reading it or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it is a fine line to walk, and that's why we say with references, it's that fine line, and so it's very easy to fall off the edge of that, and then it just becomes about the references as opposed to the story. And the references need to inform the story. Otherwise, the story is just kind of a vehicle to have references.
And do you think maybe that's one of the reasons people might have bucked against, particularly the first trailer when it came out, was because it was out of context, all the references packed together to get everyone's attention. Like, you had the Iron Giant there, you had a bunch of DeLoreans racing around, and I'm pretty sure because of the timeline, she can't possibly be in the book version, but Tracer from Overwatch is in one of the trailers as well. So, like, could it be that just in 60 seconds, putting in as many references as possible doesn't do justice to... What I think Steven Spielberg is a guy who I think could kind of inject some subtlety into the original the original work here and just kind of tone it down a little, except for at big kind of action scenes, maybe.
Yeah, there are obviously key plot points which you can't avoid the references, and that's fine. That doesn't bother me in the slightest. I'd be really interested to see what it's like, because I have seen kind of reviews on either side of it.
Yeah,
I've seen reviews saying that it's fantastic, and I've seen reviews saying that it's just a bit of a mess. So
which is exactly like the book as well.
Yeah, and I'm fascinated to see kind of how I will view it. I think most of the time, not every time, most of the time, Steven Spielberg, he's expert enough as a storyteller that he would carry it along at a fair pace, and I would enjoy it. I can't see myself knowing the content, knowing that it is a good story, and knowing that he's at the helm of it, me not enjoying it. Not saying that I would love it, but I can't see myself not enjoying it, because I think all the components are there for it to be quite an enjoyable, rip-roaring adventure.
Yeah, if he can get in there and make it a movie that's dumb because it's packed with all these kind of 80s popcorn movie references or video game references, but at least he's gone in and made it make sense, then I think I'll be fine with it.
The thing with films is I don't give a shit. Like, that's the best thing about films. I go into films and I just go, brilliant, entertain me. Someone fucking give me a box of popcorn and put some colours on the screen. Great.
Yeah.
Like, and so
to be fair, Spielberg does that better than most.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I think of the all of cinema almost on the same level as, like, I don't know, something you would flick through on the television. Like, I couldn't give a toss. So I think I'll probably like it. I think I'll probably sit there and go, Mario!
That was Staying In with Dan Frost, Peter Willington and special guest Dave Ryan. If you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Mixcloud, Acast, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you prefer to get your podcasts from. If you'd like to leave a review too, then we'd be really grateful. Visit stayingin.podbean.com for more information and links to all the things we've covered in this episode. And come find us on Twitter on @StayingInPod. And if you'd like to hear more from Dave, who is more commonly joined with his colleague Mark, then be sure to subscribe to their weekly podcast, Link to the Cast, which features all the latest stuff and nonsense from the world of video games. On every show, there's also the Link to the Cast Book Club, which looks back at a great game from the past. Previous shows have ranged from Tetris to Doom, all the way up to modern classics like The Last of Us and Vin Diesel's Wheelman, which is what Pete and I suggested should be looked at when we were on Link to the Cast. So make sure to check that out, because it is a classic Vin Diesel. Woof. You can find and subscribe to Link to the Cast on your podcast provider previously mentioned, or you can follow them on at Link to the Cast on Twitter and follow the links from there. And remember, whatever you do, just chill out and do whatever you want.